So with that, I'd like to invite our first two speakers on the stage, Mary LeBlanc and Leah Endres. Thank you. So Mary is, these are both outstanding women. I've spoken to both of them. And they have very different stories as well. So it's going to be very interesting to hear how they came up in leadership in technology organizations. And Mary, just a little bit about them. Mary is currently president and principal consultant for Bridger Val Associates, specializing in CIO leadership development and strategic consulting services. She serves on the advisory board for the Easton Technology Center at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. And she's on the board of trustees for Homeless Solutions. And Leah is an entrepreneur, educator, and human rights advocate. A renowned facilitator, she has spent most of her life working to make the tools of leadership available to everyone. Leah is the co-founder and CEO of NationBuilder. And so please welcome Leah and Mary. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is really exciting to be here. Thank you, Davida.
Hi, Leah. How are you?
Hi, Mary. So we are going to have a fireside chat. So we'll envision a blazing fire. I think our intention is to just have a real conversation and get into what's difficult about being a woman in technology, but also really speak to the promise of it. And then we'll open it up to questions. So
great.
Maybe we should start with our stories. How did you get to where you are today?
Go ahead, Leah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I did not expect to be running a tech company. I think that's a really important thing. I know we're going to talk a bit about leadership and our expectations as women, but my background is in human rights advocacy and leadership development. And as I sort of dug into the problem of how do you equip people to lead in this era, I think what I found was that it's really hard to scale without technology. And so the haiku version, I guess, of my story is that after spending many years building and running nonprofit organizations in the human rights sector, I partnered with an amazing engineer by the name of Jim Gilliam, who had this incredible idea: what if we could actually create a software that would help everyone lead? And so we built that company together over the last 8.5 years. That's kind of the nutshell of my story.
That's great. I think one of the big differences we found in talking with each other is that I spent most of my career in very large corporations. So I myself am very interested in the differences that we see in the startups versus large corporations. My undergraduate degree was not in technology. I went to UCLA and focused on management of information systems, and spent most of my career as the chief information officer in multiple industries and companies: agricultural products, Avis Budget car rental, and most recently for Novartis Pharmaceuticals. And in my story, I went to bigger and bigger and bigger companies because I found that in my first jobs, I was administering grants and contracts and cleaning up after parties. And I thought maybe if I went to bigger and bigger companies, I could specialize and I could find more opportunities to grow. And that's exactly what I did. I've had a very privileged career that I'm very grateful for, but more in the application of technology.
Mm-hmm. And when we were speaking initially, we realized how different our paths are. I think, will you say a bit about what it was like for you as a woman in the era when you were a CIO?
Yes, when I first graduated, in fact, the reason I picked information system is that the brochure for UCLA said, IT is a field long noted for its lack of discrimination for women. Now, I'm not sure if anybody here might recognize that paragraph, but I'll like Jim, I'll carbon date myself. This was 1982. And in fact, what was happening was that women were doing very well in IT because we were explaining a very technical function to very non-technical business people, and women turned out to do that really well. And on the leadership teams I started on, there were 50% women, and I had lots of opportunity. I never thought twice about it. So when I think of how Silicon Valley is doing today, it's heartbreaking in many ways for me, because I think that about the mid-90s, when the internet came in, we found that it was more technical, required more engineering, and this is really where we saw the drop-off of women. And so it's sad because I feel like in many ways we've gone backwards instead of forwards. So I'm really interested in your experience, particularly in California, because I think the other thing is large corporations, you can't overtly discriminate. They have lots and lots of HR people, very mature, and I enjoyed that environment, even though it is sublimated a little bit. I enjoyed a lot more freedom from harassment, I think, in a large company than probably you've experienced. So I'm very interested in hearing your experience from that perspective.
Oof. It's rough. Okay. I mean, I think, look, like I said, I didn't actually grow up in technology, and that wasn't my background. So my expectations, I really didn't, I didn't know what I was walking into in some respects, but I remember some of those first meetings when we were, pitching the company and raising money and walking into rooms that were entirely men, like a room of 25 guys, and the only other woman in the room was taking notes or grabbing coffee. And, the experience of being with a male co-founder who everyone essentially directs all their questions to. And I remember this one very specific experience in this one room where probably 20 plus men and me and Jim, my business partner, had been doing a lot of the talking, and then we sort of opened it up to questions, and this guy asked a question and I was the one that answered, and he looked really offended and upset about it. And I was like, whoa, this is such a different, and it just, it happened over and over again. I was mentioning to Mary earlier that I was at a conference in Silicon Valley yesterday, and the best part about it is there's no line for the women's bathroom. But it's jarring. It really is jarring. And I think the thing about that is that it can't, in my experience, is that it's very difficult for that not to affect your performance, because you're aware that everyone's sort of looking at you to represent women, or they are dismissing you. And I think it is changing. I think this is a very particular moment to the comments at the beginning of this session. This is our time. Like, this is absolutely changing, and everyone in this room is, I think, going to be a part, and is already a part of that. No doubt in my mind.
I think in the corporate world, women have been going up and then they leave at some point, and they're starting businesses themselves so that they can start to do that.
You said that you were going to bigger and bigger corporations because of the opportunities afforded to you. And it's the flip for me, because I think a lot of folks are going into and creating startup organizations because you can do everything. You get so much experience, and then 3 years in, maybe you've decided that you want that next opportunity, you go somewhere else. So I really do think, we were speaking earlier about what do we mean when we talk about tech? Like, what does that actually mean? Because the breadth of the industry is so great. And most folks are thinking about, Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook and Google, but it is a massive industry with so many different roles that people can step up into. And I think at the end, it comes down to, are you willing to step in and sort of put yourself at the table or not? I wonder if you can talk about that.
I do think they opt out at a very certain point when they hit that difference between senior management to true executive management, and they find the barriers. That's when they're sort of bailing out for that experience. But I think there's some good training people get up to that point.
Why do you think that is, that they bail out at that point?
I think that there's 2 or 3 different levels of management at which different skills. And so I think what happens to us as women is that when you're coming up the ranks, hard work matters and the output matters. But there's a point at which it switches from hard work to impact. And too many women are working really, really hard at those front lines and then hoping to get promoted and their work recognized. But what's happening is that the men are talking in their conversation about impact. And they don't care how that work gets done. And I think a lot of women there's not enough people maybe even coaching them to tell them. It's always a bit of an eye-opener when I say to people, think about impact, don't think about how hard you're working. And I think that it changes again at the senior executive level. It's much more about fear of failure. And so the tribe tends to take over at the very top, and so it's more about who do I trust, who am I in the foxhole with, which is yet again a different dynamic. And if you aren't shown that those dynamics change, and somebody doesn't tell you, you're going along in the style that got you to the last promotion, and it changes on you, and people fail. And I think the other thing too is in that top level where it's more about trust and tribe, you know, strong women who made it to that point, we're sitting there telling the truth, and we're challenging, because that's what we're supposed to do, but that challenge, you know, isn't so appreciated at that level. So what happens is, what started out as courageous leadership becomes abrasive annoyance at a certain level in the organization. And so, but you know, often we don't recognize when that happens, so.
Oof, so
Mentors.
much to say about that. So, I mean, I think the first piece around impact, I want to say explicitly, in addition, you know, working towards impact, I also think, I know for myself, I had to really work on claiming my impact.
Okay.
So I'm just putting it out there, because I think a lot of women, in my experience, and my leadership team is half women, and so we talk about this a lot, is being able to articulate, like, no, I did this, I contributed this was my idea. Because if even using the word I, like I learned early on that many men in these conversations used the word I over and over again. I did this, I created this is my idea, where the women were saying we, you know, the group of us did X, Y, Z. And so I think that's another piece of this, to be able to know your story, know what you're contributing, name it, and own the impact that you're generating, and not shying away from the fact that you did in fact create that.
And we're raised with that level of humility that we don't brag. Sure. I coach a lot of people to try and package up their accomplishments, and they say, I can't do that because that feels so braggy, you know. So I have a really good example of how I learned this lesson. We were doing pilots in 50 countries for iPads for sales reps, and one of the people who was working in one of our regions sent me this lovely presentation. It had all the data. We rolled out X number of iPads. This was the impact, you know, blah, 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 blah. So it was really great. I immediately forwarded it to our division president. It was a Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. At 4:10, he forwarded it to the CEO, says we're rolling out 25,000 of them starting tomorrow, you know. And I got credit because I forwarded the email, but I was grateful that that person packaged it up. Can you still hear me? And what I tell people is package it up. And you don't have to write a note that say, I did this. But what he wrote was really kind of neutral. We ran a pilot, he said we, and these were the results. So he had impact, and it was packaged in a way that I didn't have to rewrite it. I could simply forward it. And so when I tell people to do that, it becomes easier than writing an email at the end of the month to tell your boss what you did great that month. So you can't think of it that way. You have to think of it a little different. Does that make sense? Does that resonate?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'm so curious what people most want to talk about. So we'll definitely open it up to questions in a second. But I do think the piece around how do you actually deal with and cope in an environment that is fundamentally at some level either hostile or biased, or, you know, how did you deal with that? And I know I have some thoughts about that as well.
You know, I tell people all the time, I got up every single morning and I went into work and I did the best job I could, and I did what was right for the company. That was always in the forefront of my mind, because politics can suck you down so easily. And you want me to tell my story?
Please. There's a very specific phrase that Mary was like, I don't know if I'm going to say this.
In advance for my language. I had a philosophy. It was, I can outlast any asshole. That was my career philosophy. Basically, it says that there's a lot of mean people you run into who would like to take you down, who would like to stop you. And, you know, I said to myself, I'm about as easy to get along with as anybody I know. And if you're being mean to me, you're being mean to a lot more important people than me. I don't have to take you down. So I never got into trying to take anybody down. I just said, what is the right thing to do for the company? And really my reputation was people came to trust that what I was going to say and what I was going to do, you know, and people said to me, I don't like it when you say no, but when you say yes, I know you're going to do what you're going to do. And to me, that was really my guiding light through my whole career.
It's a great phrase. I have to say it. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the question that I have around that is the complexity of sort of what you were talking about a minute ago when you are beginning to step into accelerated, roles that have positional power. And what was previously seen as, initiative is suddenly, frowned upon. It's annoying, it's brash, it's whatever. There's so much systemic bias occurring. How do you, on an individual basis, maybe, you're outlasting folks.
Yeah.
But then being able to confront and call out and name what is unacceptable, especially when it's sort of a massive system. I mean, that's really interesting to me because I think we all end up thinking it's just us. Like I'm the only one who's having this experience. I just got to tough it out and figure it out and do my thing. And I think that's fair. I think we absolutely need to take accountability and responsibility for what is about us, that we can do better. But it also is inside of this larger ecosystem where naming what is unacceptable is critical. Saying that was not okay, what just happened, and I'm letting you know. But there's a lot that goes into that. And I think we talked earlier about positional power and leadership, and really I think the question is what does it take to lead in this moment? And I think that the skills that women have cultivated for a very, very long time are going to be at the forefront of this, what I believe is a leadership revolution that's happening. And these are skills that were developed because we had to develop them. Deep listening for what's underneath, trying to figure out what is actually being said, bringing people together, facilitating difficult conversations. And we have to name and claim that those are extraordinarily important skills that are in fact the pinnacle of leadership in this moment, and get real clear about that. And when someone's relegating us to the side as if that's not important, even though you're the person that just put the whole thing on or whatever, saying no. That was a critical role, and I did that. I need you to acknowledge that.
And you do that. I did that less in corporations, I think.
I hope I do that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And have you had both successes and failures with that? Times where you felt it worked and times where you felt it didn't work?
Yeah.
And what was the difference, do you think, in how you said it?
Here's the thing, you teach what you need to learn, right? So yeah. I don't think I did that well. I mean, I think that for many, many years, I thought that facilitation, bringing people together, sort of, actually making the thing occur wasn't, because when you think about leadership, what do you think of? You think of the people on the mic. And it's typically a white man who's up on the mic, and you're like, oh, that's the lead. So for me, it's about changing our perceptions of what we think leadership is, that actually include the skill set that many of us in this room have either naturally or we had to cultivate, or it's just part of our gift. And so bringing that into the center and saying, look, this is actually what leadership looks like. And by the way, for many, many years, I was in roles, in chief of staff roles and so on and so forth. And I remember so many women I know who were in those roles, and they're literally running the organization, COOs and chiefs of staff and so on, and they didn't think of themselves as leaders. We have to change that. Yeah. We have to change that.
I think this thing about encouraging other people, I often spoke up in meetings, and people would say to me, oh, I'm so glad you said that, because everybody was thinking it. And I turned to him at one point, I said, it would be really nice if one of you, one of these times, also said it, because I did get a bit of a reputation for challenging that actually worked against me later. And as I reflect on my career, I think, was there a different way I could have said that? I think sometimes it's how you say it. Now, it's important to call it out, but how you say it takes some practice and some learning and some feedback from people, I think.
I feel like we got the signal that it's time to move on to Q&A. So
yeah, we'd love to do some Q&A. Yeah, to hear what's on your minds, actually. Because Lee and I could go on talking for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, that's true. And we know everyone's eating, so it's hard to get to the mics. But you can yell, and we'll...
So while we had some differences in our career, we also had some similarities, right?
I know, I just saw a hand.
So, yeah. Okay.
If you yell it, we can repeat it. Yeah.
So one of the things I noticed about your perspective, my mic right here.
Oh, they put him
Totally.
up there, yeah. It's like a town hall.
Hi, my name is also Leah.
Awesome.
And I'm also an
name is
entrepreneur. One of the things I noticed about your 2 different perspectives is that I think for you, Leah, part of what you're talking about is changing the way things are currently done. And for Mary, I think it's more about let's find a way to fit into the way things are currently run. So those are obviously two polar opposites in some ways. How do you think we can find the balance and do a little bit of both?
I felt that I had an impact. I wanted to get high enough in my career because I could spread my impact. I tried to have impact on the people who worked for me, and I felt that going along and getting along in a large corporation enabled me to do that. And so for me, it was a different path to drive change, but it was change from within. So for me, for example, every company is a digital company now. IT, in my group was seen always as partners, and we drove change and effectiveness in the content of the work we did. But you're right, I didn't try to change the environment for women, but I tried to change the impact I could have.
Yeah, I really think we have to do both. I mean, it really isn't an either or. I think parallel processing and really making change inside of the institutions as they are, and then also just innovating in a completely new way that disrupts what the traditional models are. I mean, I really think we have to do both. And I also think, when you create something new, you often obsolete another system. So I do think it's about doing both. And look, recognizing what's worked. And I think one of the things that Davida asked us to speak to was this idea of like what got you where you are now won't get you there. Like there's a new thing that has to happen in this moment that I think pulls and honors the old, so to speak, what came before, but that is related to the context that we're now in. We are living in such an incredible time and such a complex time. So when you think about it, like what are the skills that we all need to cultivate, to navigate through a time of global transition and transformation? And P.S., technology is at the forefront of that. Like when we talk, again, the breadth of technology, like for me, what's important about technology is how do we solve our biggest problems? I'm not interested in technology for technology's sake. Like how do we solve our biggest problems? And so I do think it's, I went off on a tangent there, but to your point, I do really think it's both. Oh, we have someone on the left, or our left, and then.
Maybe we should form a line right there.
Cool. Yeah, if that's okay. I know folks are eating. If people want to form lines, there's 2 mics. Yeah.
We lost our timer.
So I thought what you said about the tribal mentality was very interesting. So I kind of wanted to ask specifically about being women in this industry. You touched upon something very important, which is the fact that we do have these skills that men probably never had to think about, including deep listening and having just extremely higher emotional intelligence than most of our male counterparts. So I guess I wanted to ask if there was any tactics or actual practical examples of how we would navigate that aspect of the tribe mentality and showing impact in a way that would resonate with them. Maybe Mary, you probably, actually both of you, because you talked about walking into a room with all men and having to deal with that question, right? So like, do you have specific examples so we can talk about where you've navigated that by using these skills that we all have being women in this industry? And, any advice in that respect?
I think there's a negotiations session later. I have to say that my best IT training was two courses. One was negotiating, and 2 was sales. They were not technology, but the negotiation skills of learning to do that listening, to understand what people are really needing, what they're afraid of, what are their fears, what do they need as opposed to what they're asking for is very developable as a skill, I would say, for sure.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence may be something a little different, but.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the key in all of this is just to remember we're dealing with people.
Yeah.
If you're trying to create a nonprofit or a company or anything else or invent a technology, at the end of the day, you're going to be working with people. So improving your ability to navigate what that's like, how to build effective teams, it's critical.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're all humans.
Yeah. I feel like there was someone over here. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey.
Hi, hello. You mentioned earlier, quote, outlasting the a-holes. Really curious if I'm often finding, and I'm currently in a situation where it's not our male counterparts, but actually female counterparts who may actually sit in that position. Curious if either of you have experienced that, and what is some of your advice, because karma isn't coming around as fast as I would like.
Sometimes it takes 30 years, it's true.
No.
Oof, yeah, I mean, okay. So it depends on the context, but I do think one of my deep philosophies, and I think it's the same for at our company, is being able to actually talk about it when something like that happens and be real specific and say, so hey, we were in that meeting, you rolled your eyes, or I noticed that you rolled your eyes, or you kind of made a comment under your breath, like, what's that about? What's that about? I really want us to work well together. I really want us to jam out and create together. And also, by the way, ideally enjoy working with each other. Like, what's going on? So it depends, again, on the circumstance if that's possible, but I don't think we do that enough. I think we let it lie over email or Slack or 15.5 or whatever the technologies that we're using, and we don't actually say, hey, can you get on the phone? I just want to check something out with you. And I do think the piece, though, around it coming from women is really painful. Like, I don't know the answer to that because it is so painful when it happens. What we do at NationBuilder is we now have a women's group that's sort of like organically formed. And so folks are able to talk to each other about what they're experiencing, and also it helps us give each other feedback and call each other out when we're like, hey, you actually kind of like blocked me on that, and that was frustrating. But it's a hard question.
I would agree with Leah. I think several times I had people, if they were being mean to me, I sat with them alone and I said, is there something wrong? And what I found out was that he had heard a rumor about me that I didn't respect his work. And so his behavior was based on that. When I said, oh my God, that's just not true. So I think that in some cases, there's usually something else maybe going on. I think when you get to the point where they really are just, not nice people, I think ignoring them is good if you can, and keeping focused on getting from them what you need and accomplishing your goal. But, don't let that drag you down from your goals, because ultimately your success will be based on that.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you guys for, can I lower this? I don't know, for speaking. And so many of your experiences are very relatable to me. I love computer coding, but I'm an econ major. I dabble in everything. I love design. And I've often found myself to be the lone female voice in the room. And oftentimes I'm labeled as an annoyance. And you guys are talking about, it's more about how you speak it and how you take up that space. And I was wondering if you guys had any tips on the how part of it, because I often find myself wanting to speak up and being that voice, but then I want to do it the way that reaches out to the best people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A lot of thoughts about that. I think we have to be really mindful of when we talk about meeting people where they are, and so adjusting ourselves or shaping ourselves in some way so they can, quote, hear us better. Yes, that is a thing, and it can be also really difficult because there's something about that isn't authentic, isn't true to who you are, and can feel like you're kind of contorting to be what someone else wants you to be. And so I think we have to hold that paradox. There are times where we actually might need to adjust our strategy and our tone and how we show up so that folks can hear us. And there's other times where that's just not okay. And we actually have to be like, I'm gonna say this the way I need to say this because you all need to hear my voice and my story and what I'm bringing to this, because by the way, you need me, whether or not you know it. You need me. Like we heard at the beginning with Davita's slides, that the diverse teams perform better, period. And so I guess what I'm saying is we have to hold the tension of doing both. And so in terms of the how, I do think knowing who you're speaking to, knowing if you feel like you're in a safe context or not, to be able, there all those pieces, but really think about pay attention to that moment where you're like, I have to say something, and honor yourself and do that.
And I can add to the how. Before I went into executive committee, my problem was the opposite. I tended to talk too much. I always made sure I had 30 minutes before any very important meeting that I had nothing else going on so I could spend it quietly. I do deep breathing, I say prayers, and honestly, I say prayer, please help me say the right things. And then when I'm in the meeting, I think to myself, is what I'm about to say going to add to this conversation? And I think for you, it's the reverse. Does this conversation need my voice? You know, and I think those are really helpful for achieving exactly what Leah's talking about, that ability to hear and to say things in the space we need to say them so they can be heard.
And know that it might not work all the time, and it's hard when that happens, and then have support so that you can, like Mary asked me earlier, what do you do? And I'm like, dance.
Yeah, that's right.
Sing, like shake it off.
If she had a
do what you
really
gotta
bad
do.
day, I asked her, what if you have a really bad experience? What do you do?
Dance.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
dance, I
mean,
think.
just to move it through, you know, and let it go. I know we're out. Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
My question is, and obviously these mics were not for women in tech. So a lot of times what happens to me in meetings is I'm the leader of the meeting in a client-facing role. And what always happens is I'll go through a whole presentation, I'll talk them through all the steps that they need to do to integrate their technology into their business operations. And always there's some executive, usually a guy, but it can be women as well, who are like, great, introduce me to your tech resource. And I'm like, that's me. I am that person.
Mm-hmm.
But what they mean is, I want to hear it from a guy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate that? It's really hard not to be like, I am the MFer tech resource.
It is really hard not to do that. Oh, wow. It really depends on the situation. I think, do you have thoughts on that?
No.
Yeah, I mean, really the only response is your initial, like,
Yes, I think that was actually what I was thinking she might do.
I think that for me, I would just declare, so that's me.
So that's me, yeah.
Is there a reason you're looking to hear that from someone else?
Okay,
Yeah, that's good.
that's how I've approached it. I just wanted to make sure I was
Yeah.
like,
No,
That's
you're-
that nice calling
you're
them
spot
on it a little bit. She's got a really nice edge to that,
Yeah.
doesn't she?
it's me.
Yeah.
If there are further questions, you can address those to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we don't have time.
I'm
for
sorry.
that. I'm really sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, both
Okay.
Leah and Mary.
Thank you, everyone.